Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I want to first thank all of you for investing your time with us today. We've developed this topic for today's webinar based on an area in our industry that's getting more and more attention. Furthermore, this topic represents an area of ENFOS that we're seeing a massive increase in adoption over the past 2 to 3 years. And I'm talking, of course, about environmental data management and specifically managing emerging contaminants. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Douglas, and I will be today's host. Just a couple of logistical items before we get started here. First, today's webinar is being recorded and will be sent to everyone that is live and also that registered within the next couple of days. All callers are default muted, so we encourage you to please ask questions in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right-hand side of your screen. And then time permitting, we'll answer as many questions as possible live at the end. If there are questions that we don't get to, we will follow up with answers to those through email. Many of you today on the call are already customers or users of ENFOS, but some are not. So I'd like to provide just a brief introduction. And if you're interested in continuing the conversation, both mine and Evan's contact information will be on the last slide. But for those of you that aren't aware, ENFOS is a software company. We help organizations manage all of their project, financial, and environmental data around their environmental liability projects, all in one place. We're a cloud-based software as a service, meaning all you need to access ENFOS is an internet connection and a web browser. As I mentioned, ENFOS is designed as an expert system specifically for managing complex services, including environmental liabilities. We provide our customers with data and context by allowing them to combine project management, environmental, technical, and financial data all in one place. Strategic partners and suppliers that work with our customers have permission-based access, allowing them to collaborate on projects regarding scope, schedule, and budget to ensure a single version of the truth. We help our customers manage their entire environmental liability reserve process through its life cycle by connecting the reserve and budgeting process with spend management inside of a project management framework. And then we can integrate on the back end with systems such as SAP and Ariba to streamline those business processes. And one of the key areas we'll be talking about on today's webinar is our non-invasive environmental technical data management approach to allow our customers to not only own but possess their environmental data. So having that capability allows our customers, like the ones on the screen here, manage their entire portfolio the exact same way at any scale while reducing their level of effort, automating business workflow, and minimizing risks. So with that, I would like to introduce our speaker today. Roger Well is a co-founder of ENFOS and currently serves as our president and chief operating officer. He has over 32 years of experience in the field, having started his career as an environmental consultant. Roger has a bachelor's and master's in geology in addition to an MBA. So with that, Roger, I'd like to turn it over to you to get us going on this important topic.
Great, thank you, Mike. And Mike, just doing a quick sound check, making sure that I'm audible.
You sound great.
Okay. Well, I'd like to second Mike's welcome and thank you for attending our webinar. The inspiration for this webinar came from several conversations that I've had recently with the heads of remediation programs. And one of their major pain points that's been occurring over the last couple of years is the frequency and the magnitude of information requests that are coming from the C-suite. So depending on the nature of the request, many times the remediation organization finds themselves completely unprepared, and the fire drill that ensues ends up being very disruptive. So that's the inspiration for today's talk. And we're going to focus on a trending area around emerging contaminants and the types of information that's being requested and methodologies of obtaining and then delivering that information to the C-suite. So on the agenda for today, we'll cover what you will learn, the problem statement and the implications of that, enterprise information capabilities, and we'll end with some key takeaways and then some questions and answers. In terms of what you will learn today, we'll talk about the firefighting mode and how to stop it, why emerging contaminants are getting so much attention from the executives. We'll discuss the spectrum of information management capabilities, all the way from a decentralized model to an enterprise model. And we'll also have a demonstration to show some examples of how requests that are coming to ENFOS customers are able to deal and manage those in the most effective way. So I'd like to start off with this discussion about firefighting, which is really unplanned work within businesses and governmental agencies and entities. And unplanned work, as I mentioned before, is very disruptive, and it's very disruptive in a lot of ways. First of all, it makes the teams react to a series of requests that they may not have the capability to deliver based on the timeline that they're given. It's going to steal time away from your planned work. It'll upset your priorities and your prioritization. This firefighting around information request will almost always recur, and it certainly will cascade. It's usually not just hitting one person, it's usually hitting a group of people at the customer organization, as well as their environmental suppliers, who most times are the organizations or entities that have the information that's being requested. And finally, unplanned work and these fire drills, they end up requiring heroic and costly efforts. Costly not only in direct cost of the task or the project itself, but also in the indirect costs around all that disruption that's happening. So there are strategies to be more proactive. We've listed a few of them here, and we're going to talk about some of these individually in some slides. But the primary strategies to be more proactive include automation, creating and deploying a knowledge base, having the team and the resources that are there to predict trends and to strategize on how to manage those more effectively, knowing that they're going to recur, a systems thinking basis, certainly data governance, certainly your information modeling and design, which is related to data governance, and then also putting in place or having the plans to put in place an enterprise level business application. Over on the right is a little tool to help manage time. This is the Eisenhower matrix. And yes, that is from the 34th president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. But this prioritization tool is designed to help teams and individuals sort out their less urgent and less important tasks. But as you probably know, the requests that are coming from the executive team are usually both urgent and important, at least to those making the requests. But at the end of the day, your action is required one way or the other. So what we'd like to do now is dissect the work breakdown structure around what happens and how do we try to deal with one of these large or mega information requests. And that really is, at level 1, trying to fulfill the request. If you break that down to level 2, these boxes shaded in blue, it really comes down to these major activities: clarifying the assignment, identifying your data sources, acquiring the data, cleansing the data, consolidating, verifying, and then preparing your deliverable. Underneath that level is where the work actually happens. And you can see that there are lots and lots of tasks and activities to actually be able to fulfill that overall data request. Again, depending on the magnitude and the schedule, that will dictate how many of these activities you will do and how much time you will spend on any one of them. The activities in the center of this chart, acquiring the data, cleansing the data, and consolidating the data, are by far the most time-consuming and costly. And we'll talk more about your technical maturity or your digital maturity and how your actual technical capability will allow you to do those areas more timely and more efficient versus those that don't. And if you looked at that work breakdown structure list and you're tasked with doing this, this certainly ends up being your focal point for the day, because your planned work, your to-do list, is really just going to go up in flames in trying to fulfill this data request. So bringing this back to the trend around emerging contaminants, we have a few points that we want to bring out. And the first one is the source of the unplanned information request. Why is this happening? These are some of the main reasons or drivers of that. We have unprecedented regulatory focus. The media is targeting this subject. When television shows like 60 Minutes and others start showing industry type sessions around PFAS and other emerging contaminants, you know that it's being targeted. There's high levels of uncertainty and risk, which leads to the C-suite focus on ESG and regulatory risk. It ranks very high with the CEO survey data from PricewaterhouseCoopers and others that have been managing or monitoring these trends. But because of these reasons, and that's being driven also by the US EPA around emerging contaminants, the C-suite and the executive teams are certainly seeing these types of business risks, and that flows down to the remediation management team, who's responsible for the stewardship of property and land, and particularly contaminated land. So they're asking the questions: what types of risks do we have? What are the uncertainties? And what are we going to do about it? EPA just came out with their announcement of draft CCL5, as you can see in the lower right-hand corner. So this frequency of new contaminant candidates has been increasing. They're on list number 5 now. That's under review, but expect this to continue to accelerate. And at the bottom, you see some of the major emerging contaminants, both from a federal facility as well as the private sector, that are in play here. So when you get asked to fulfill a large information request, no matter what the information is, but particularly around analytical data, you have to ask the first question, which is, where are our data sources? And the answer to that is, it depends. And it depends because there are many different strategies that organizations have put in place to manage this data. By far, the most prevailing strategy is the decentralized model on the left. And that makes sense. It's always been done that way. But in this model, your data is scattered all over the place, and it's in many different formats. And this might be data with your laboratories, with your environmental consultants, either your current consultants or your former consultants. And they have offices and data centers all over the world themselves. That information might be on your own internal networks and hard drives. Some of it's paper, some of it's digital, but I think you get the point. That's the lowest level of technical maturity. The middle model, or the hybrid model, is the next level of maturity. In this approach, the customer generally has retained a consulting company to house the data and to perform data quality management. However, data in this model is impounded and kept from the end users until it's been released or signed off on by this gatekeeper. This is a very laborious and expensive journey. And another significant problem with this approach is that it's generally a single purpose application. Single purpose in being that it's designed for analytical data, maybe sample locations, maybe field data, but it's generally a single purpose. It's not also managing project portfolio information. It's not managing financial information. It's not helping with engagement with the supply chain and so on. But the big takeaway here is that it's typically a single purpose hybrid type solution where many other systems are still needed to effectively run the remediation program. The enterprise model on the right, which I'll discuss in more detail, is the highest level of digital maturity. It also has the lowest total cost of ownership, and it has the highest level of data velocity. Getting data from the field and lab into the hands of the end users, and the velocity of that is increased substantially with the enterprise model. The enterprise model also allows multiple purpose information management activities and business workflow, some of which I mentioned before. Here's a matrix that does an evaluation of those three models: decentralized, hybrid, and enterprise. So reactive or proactive, you can see the summary of those for each model. Digital maturity levels, which I've talked about. The data governance level. The data linkage level, you can see, is low with both the decentralized and the hybrid, and that's because the technical data is siloed from the rest of the organization's data assets. The business intelligence level, which has to do with the data linkage and the joins between technical data with project and site information, as well as financial information. What are we reserving for? What are our adjustments to those estimate to completes? What are our scopes of work? What work have we committed? and then our spend. Information accessibility level, and then total cost of ownership. It's interesting on the decentralized model, many people believe that information management is a low cost for them in the decentralized model. In reality, it's the highest. It's a hidden cost because you're not getting charged for software. You're basically getting charged professional service fees to manage that information in a decentralized way. So I want to drill into the enterprise business model a little further. So in the remediation industry, you have the environmental consultants, environmental contractors, and laboratories that are generating data. There's a lot of workflow leading up to the point of having information that's ready for deliverables to the customer or to the regulators. The environmental suppliers and laboratories have been and will continue to invest in their own ecosystems, their own digital platforms. The maturity levels are increasing significantly, as we have seen with these organizations, both small, medium, and large consultancies. They get paid to do this, right? They're doing all of the front end work around sample event planning, communicating orders to laboratories and to field contractors. They're going out into the field and collecting both field data and lab samples. They're tracking samples with the laboratories and tracking deliverable dates with the laboratories. They're receiving data inputs from the laboratories and so on. But these activities are repeated over and over again on thousands of sites and sample events in each consultancy that's managing this work for the customer. Once the data has been finalized, it's gone through all of the QA/QC associated with the data quality management plans. The information has been vetted and signed off on internally within the consulting organizations. The final deliverable of the customer's data to the enterprise system is the preferred workflow. And what that does is that puts clean data into the enterprise system that already has the foundations for sites and projects established within it. It already has the financial information associated with those projects, both the life cycle estimates as well as the short-term scopes of work and costs. And it can be brought in via an API or an EDD and immediately joined with the rest of the content, giving the customer data in context. In addition to that, customers are able to join their ENFOS data that contains all those components with other sources of data or with a single source of data and involve that in their data warehouse and business intelligence applications. But this is the enterprise model that we talked about on that spectrum of technical maturity. There are data governance considerations around the enterprise model, but the enterprise model gives the customer and all of the entities using that the opportunity to enforce the data governance standards throughout the whole process. And that starts with the project hierarchy structure. Some organizations have thousands of remediation sites or sites that are somewhere in the site characterization through remedial action stages. in order to properly organize the data sets, the project hierarchy structure must first be established. And it also has to be configurable and flexible through time as sites are closed, new sites come in, and as these organizations reorganize from time to time. The hierarchy and the application have to have access, roles, and controls built in. Configurations around data uniformity and data integrity can be enforced in a single place. Data is consolidated in the course of information being uploaded or imported into the enterprise application. So you don't have to have a separate consolidate step. Information rolls up in the organization for doing portfolio-wide assessments or programmatic analysis. Query and search tool across the entire organizational hierarchy. And what that will give you will be a new user story. So this is what we looked at previously, primarily with a decentralized model in place. With an enterprise model, you can see that these middle activities of identifying data sources, acquiring data, cleansing data, and consolidating data, they're eliminated with an enterprise model. This gives organizations the best opportunity to be able to respond to information requests about emerging contaminants, but also any other type of requests that might come along. Requests from the CFO around the environmental reserve. Why is it going up? Why is it going down? What projects, what reasons, and so on. So this new user story is the end state if your organization has or is considering deploying an enterprise model for your remediation program. So we're going to move into some demonstrations showing the enterprise model in action. The first one I'm going to show is an unstructured data query using a document index search. So unstructured data versus structured data is a common theme when talking about analytics and reporting. Unstructured data, if you think about it, is typically files that are loaded or imported into an application. So these can be Word documents, Excel documents, PDFs, JPEGs, and so on. So being able to have access to all of your files through time and having the technical capability to do unstructured data queries is certainly one approach and one tool in fulfilling these data and information requests. Portfolio level analyte detail searches. Sensitive receptors with target analyte search. Site watch lists. And then finally, we'll do a demo on drilling down to additional liability details. So what we're doing here is the unstructured data search. So I'm going into a document search, and I'm interested in this PFAS compound. And through the application, I can determine where do I want to search within the enterprise system, which is ENFOS. What module do I want to search? Or I can just select all modules. That gives me a full, complete view across all files uploaded to the system. I can search on specific file types or all. And I can also sort my results by either relevance on my search criteria or on last modified. I can also search within the hierarchy structure that I talked about earlier, or I could search for the entire organization. So in this case, we have 163 results. The search results provide additional metadata, such as the site, like River Road, Illinois site, other references, and it provides me with a description of where my keyword search matched from an indexed document that's in ENFOS. So in this case, what I did there was I searched for a specific PFAS, and I found it 163 times within our enterprise system. I can click on those links, I can download them, can export my results, and I can have an analyst go through that to find the information that we're looking for. So now I'm going to move into more of a structured data query. So in this case, I'm going into the ENFOS reporting module, and I'm going to create a portfolio. A portfolio is a subset of sites based on some criteria that's important to me. In this case, it's analyte details. I get a filter page where I can select one or more analytes of concern. Everything we're seeing here means that that analyte name exists in the application somewhere. So you can see I can select one or more, or I can key in on just one. I can set a minimum and maximum result value. I can set a date range, or I could use a relative date range of all dates. I can search for sample locations that are either on-site or off-site, or both. I can save and name this portfolio. That's now saved as a portfolio for me to use from this point forward. That's a one-time operation. And what I like to do is I like to map my results so I can see how many hits I get based on that specific criteria for that analyte detail. I can run this as a map report, which you're going to see here. So these are all the sites where that PFAS compound exists. I can use the map to drill down. And you can see I'm hovering over a couple sites where the occurrence does exist, Jefferson City and River Road. I can now come in on that same portfolio that I just created and just mapped. I can now come in and run any kind of report against it. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to combine sensitive receptors with my analyte search. I'm looking for receptors that are in or on or near the property boundary within 300 feet. I'm going to run this report, and it's going to query every single site in the application, no matter if you have 30,000 sites or 50 sites. In this case, I find a hit. So you can see my portfolio with my PFAS, but I also have a private supply well within half of a mile. Now I'm going to drill down into this specific site. This is River Road. It's a fictitious site. I go into my site module, and now I can immediately start querying my points of interests that are in my area-wide survey, such as water wells, receptors, and toxic sites. I can also look at my sensor receptor survey that my consultant has done for me, and I can see information around public and private supply wells within a certain radius of my site. I can now drill down onto the map for my site, zoom in. I can view those points of interest on the map that we were just looking at in the table. The blue are wells, the purple are other contaminated sites in the area. I can click on the link on the map to look at more information. I can now then also look at my actual sample locations on the site. I can get information about a specific sample location by clicking on the pen. And now I might want to drill down into very specific, site-specific results. So now I'm going into the data module. After those higher level queries, I'm looking at my most recent analytical results for some groundwater samples. I can sort from high to low, and I can start evaluating now at a site-specific level my PFAS results. In this demonstration, I'm now going back to the full portfolio. There's over 1,000 sites in this customer's portfolio. You can see they're global. I'm going to come in and take a look at my emerging contaminant watch list sites. This was a portfolio I already created. I can click on map to see those watch list sites. So out of my 1,000 sites, I have now 6 sites that I put on my watch list. They're listed here in red. I can zoom in on those. I can click on the pins to get more information. I already bookmarked one of those sites. I'm now going to our remediation area of concern, and I'm going to drill down now into my liability details. So here I'm looking at my most recent or my latest estimate by phase of work, $600,000. I might want to look at my reserve or my provision balance in real time to the penny. So I can see my original estimates, my adjustments, and my spend, and then my balance, so all the calculations. I can now drill down into my last approved plan, and I can take a look at my work activity on a Gantt chart. So here I see my same phases of work with some more milestones put in, and I can report back to the executive team or to my boss about what we're doing and why and when on this particular site. So now I'm going to move into our key takeaways from this presentation. Enterprise environmental liability management creates strategic value for your data assets. So we had several slides talking about it, and then I showed you 3 separate use cases about how an enterprise application that's designed specifically for liability management, such as remediation or decommissioning, can help create value with your data. Leadership within our customer organizations or within the industry in general, leadership is responsible for tracking trends and making informed decisions about organizational and digital needs. And the as-is business models have very high hidden costs, while enterprise solutions will have the lowest total cost of ownership through time. And with that, Mike, I will turn it over to you to wrap up the webinar.
Great. Thanks, Roger. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, if if anyone on this call is new to ENFOS or wants to have any follow-up conversation about this webinar, feel free to reach out to either myself or Evan. Our contact information is on the screen. Roger, we did have some questions come in, and I'd like to go over those, but I'd like to also invite the rest of you. If you do have questions, you can enter those on the right-hand side of your screen should be the GoToWebinar control panel, and there should be a section towards the bottom called questions. If you want to submit your questions there, we'll try our best to get to them live. So Roger, can I go ahead with some of the questions we've already got in?
Yes.
All right. So first question, you spoke about strategies to be proactive to avoid unplanned work. What reporting options does ENFOS recommend in order to be proactive?
Sure. The report itself is the end result, right? It's the deliverable. And that is the deliverable to fulfill the actual information request. Now, smart leaders start anticipating what those requests might be because they're following trends in the industry. And they'll start planning and putting solutions in place, typically digital solutions in place, to get ahead of those information requests, to be proactive. And in order to get to that end state, you have to start thinking about, what does the current ecosystem look like that we have in place? And that includes your own internal systems, but also the systems of your environmental consultants. And a decision has to be made about, are we in the business of providing technical software to our consultants, or are we relying on our consultants to have their own digital strategies and to be able to deliver to us, following our data governance standards, the information we need for reporting? So that's a key consideration, and that falls under that second key takeaway about leadership's responsibility. Now, if you're looking for tools within the application to alert you of conditions that might be of high risk, then that's technical capability, right? That's basically a business requirement and then a capability within your application. So an example of that is being alerted when you have an exceedance on a site that you're managing, all the way down to an individual sample location. You might be doing down gradient perimeter site monitoring of a particular analyte of concern. And your application needs the ability for you to set up that alert, right? Based on the media, the sample point type, possibly a lab method, certainly an analyte, and then a threshold value that could be a regulatory standard, or it could be an internal standard of care, or it could even be a activity level that's just internal. If this concentration of this analyte reaches X or X% of the previous result, I want to be alerted. So having the ability to create those on the fly, manage many alerts on many different sites and many different points is another factor that can help you, when you're actually dealing with the day-to-day aspects. So there's kind of two parts to that. There's one, preparing for the big data requests. That's more digital strategy in nature. And then the other is, what are we doing to report and be proactive once we have an application like that in place? And using email alert notifications or push notifications to mobile devices is a key method of handling that.
Okay. Another question, Roger, can you explain the non-invasive data management and the business value of it?
Sure. The non-invasive data management is an ENFOS innovation, and it's through our years and years of experience helping industrial companies and governmental entities manage their information and their workflows around their information. And it gets into that spectrum, starting at a decentralized approach to a hybrid approach to an enterprise approach. But the basis of non-invasive environmental data management is that you're relying on your environmental consultants to invest in their digital strategies, practices, and technologies. You're also leaning on them to have very strong data quality management programs in place and having the technology to support that. However, that's the consultant's realm. That's their wheelhouse, that's their strength. And you can, as a company leader, you can set up, through your data governance, you can set up standardization and uniformity on what it is that you want in the customer possessed system. And it's typically defined as a final set of deliverables. This would be data that's already gone through the consultant's QA, QC process. It's already been reviewed, analyzed. Errors and fix-ups have already been handled between the consultant and the lab. The multiple iterations of electronic data deliverables that have to happen, that's all being done through the supplier's ecosystem and their work with the laboratories that they're subcontracting with, or the labs that are part of a lab program with the customer. At the end of the day, after a certain amount of time, the final deliverable will come in from the supplier's ecosystem, and there's many of them, to the customer's single source system. But it's final data. It's reportable data. It's been verified and validated. And all those processes leading up to that are being done within the consultant's ecosystem. That's what non-invasive data management is. It's not the customer's business to try to centralize the data quality management, right? That's the hybrid approach. You end up with a silo, and you end up with data being hostage and impounded until it's released to the end users. So non-invasive is a different model that basically says we want final clean data into our enterprise application, where it will be immediately joined with our project and portfolio data. That's locations and sites and projects and areas of concern. It'll immediately be joined with our financial information, such as our environmental reserves, our operating expense budgets, and so on. And it will be immediately available for analytics. It's already clean data, and it's, as I mentioned before, it's the lowest total cost of ownership. And now I've got not only the PDFs of my final written reports, but I have actual data in the customer's enterprise system now that I can involve it in queries, searches, reporting, and analytics. Okay, Mike?
Okay, thanks, Roger. All right, next question. Is a lab EDD considered structured or unstructured data?
Okay, great question. The answer is both. And it's both because the lab deliverable should consist of an actual data set, usually following some EDD format, but it also consists of a backup document, the narrative, the lab report, so that's a PDF. And once that EDD is ingested by the enterprise system, then you have structured data that was created from the processing of the EDD. So I have structured data after the EDD has been processed, such as the analyte searches that I was working on. The actual EDD files themselves are stored and retained in the application. Those files are unstructured data until they are read by the document indexing routine. And then that information is also available in the document search. And then that final document, which is the PDF copy of the lab report, that would be unstructured data as well. Certainly there's metadata that comes along with a file like a PDF, right? Such as the file size, the file type, who entered it, the data was entered, the status, and so on. So some of the metadata that comes along with those files becomes structured data, but it's a mix. It's a mix. Most people think about an EDD as structured data, and it becomes structured data, again, after it's been ingested. But the file itself and the backup documents are unstructured. Okay, Mike?
All right. If we already have a centralized lab data management software system, can that system be interfaced with ENFOS?
It certainly can. And it may not be the most optimum approach. However, it's ultimately a systems integration problem being solved in that example. And my whole discussion about non-invasive environmental data management, it can fit that model as well. In fact, there's less moving parts if you have that in place. So you have your siloed, centralized data management system based on the context of that question. And what you want to be able to do is integrate, again, final deliverables and final EDDs to your ENFOS enterprise system. And that can be done technically in several ways. It can follow a traditional EDD importing process. It can be done via APIs such as REST or SOAP, and there are other opportunities as well. But in that case, yes. So ENFOS as the enterprise system forms the umbrella because that contains all the other major data categories such as project information and site and location information. It includes the project management details. It includes all the financial information. And then it also includes the technical information that in this example would be coming from that single purpose application that houses that information. So that can be interfaced with ENFOS to give that customer, right, the best of both worlds. They've got all their data now in one place where they can involve it in portfolio level reporting, mapping, and business intelligence.
Okay, great. Well, again, I want to thank everyone for their time today, for sitting in on this webinar with us. Again, if you have any additional follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to either myself or Evan. We did get a couple other questions, but we'll need to follow up on those through email. And thanks everyone again for joining us. The recording of this will go out within the next couple days, and look out for the next webinar. We hope to do one more before the end of this year. Thanks again.
Thanks everyone.